The blizzard didn't just fall on Willow Creek that night, it attacked. It swallowed driveways and silenced power grids, plunging mansions into a deadly, deepening freeze. For single dad and HVAC tech Leo, it meant another emergency call, this one to the isolated, glass-walled estate of billionaire investor Evelyn Thorne. He arrived to restore her heat, his skills her only lifeline. When she opened the door, the shock was mutual. The last time they'd met, she was the CEO who told him he wasn't executive material. Now, in the howling dark, he was the most essential person in her world. Leo Cruz wasn't just any technician. He was the owner of Prime Climate, a one-man operation he built from nothing after that same rejection, now the most requested name across 3 counties when the freeze sets in. For him, this call was about his daughter's tuition and keeping his promise to never be powerless again. For Evelyn Thorne, shivering in her $20 million glass fortress, it was about survival. The question hanging in the frozen air between them wasn't just about the broken heater. It was whether a single moment from the past could ever truly be fixed. 5 years earlier, Leo had walked into the sleek lobby of Thorne Ventures wearing his only suit. It was for a project manager role in their new sustainable infrastructure division. He had a degree in mechanical engineering and 7 years of hands-on HVAC and building systems experience. He'd spent nights studying green building codes, believing this was his bridge from turning wrenches to designing systems. Evelyn Thorne conducted the final interview herself. She was 42 then, a legend for turning a small family investment firm into a clean tech powerhouse. She looked at his resume, then at his hands, the same hands he'd tried to scrub clean of ground and grease, and said the words that would live in his head for years. "You have impressive practical knowledge, Mr. Cruz, but this role requires a certain executive presence, a polish we cultivate. I don't see that fit here." He'd left feeling invisible, the technical drawings in his portfolio suddenly seeming like childish sketches. That rejection became fuel. He used his last $3,000 to register a business license, buy a used van and print flyers, Prime Climate. He promised same-day service, a guarantee no corporate outfit could match. The first year was torturous. He'd work a 16-hour day installing a furnace, then come home to his daughter Chloe, who was just 4 years old. His wife, Maria, had left 2 years before, unable to handle the financial strain of his startup dreams. He'd read Chloe bedtime stories with his eyes burning from exhaustion, his mind racing about the parts invoice due next week. But Leo had an advantage the corporate chains didn't. He was the only one who answered the phone at 2 a.m. during the Great Freeze of 2019. When a pipe burst in the ceiling of the Willow Creek Public Library, he was the one who crawled through the dripping insulation to solder a fix, saving irreplaceable local archives. People remembered. They told neighbors. His name spread through whispers over frozen driveways. "Call Leo. He comes." By the time Chloe was 8, Prime Climate wasn't just surviving. It was the first call for the town's oldest families and its newest boutique hotels. He'd hired 2 apprentices, but the emergency calls, the ones where the heat was dead and the breath was fogging inside a home, he still took those himself. It was a point of pride. It was also quietly a fortress. Every thank you, every referral was another brick in the wall against that feeling of not being enough, of lacking polish. The night of the blizzard, his phone had not stopped screaming since the first flakes fell. He'd already restored heat to family with a newborn and a block of elderly apartments. Chloe was with his sister safe. He was running on coffee and momentum when the call from the Thorne estate came through on his dedicated emergency line. The address made his breath catch. He knew the place. Everyone did. A modernist glass monument on Crestline Ridge, all aesthetics and huge windows, a nightmare to heat. The automated system reported a total furnace failure and exterior temperatures plummeting to -15. He almost told his dispatcher to give it to another team, but his rule was his rule, and the fee for a blizzard night service call to the Ridge was 4 times his normal rate. Chloe's future college fund stared back at him from the spreadsheet in his mind. He took the job. The drive up the mountain was a white-knuckle battle against wind shears that threatened to shove his van into a ravine. The mansion was a ghostly silhouette, dark except for the flicker of emergency candles. When she opened the 10-foot walnut door, Evelyn Thorne was a different woman from the magazine covers. No power suit. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, her face pale, her famous composure fractured by genuine fear. The recognition was not instant for her. She was just grateful to see another human being. "Thank God you're here," she'd said, her voice thin. "The thermostat's dead. It's colder in here than it is out there." He'd simply nodded, professional mask firmly in place. "Leo Cruz, prime climate, let me assess the system." He followed her into the vast, double-height living room, the marble floor like ice under his boots. That's when he saw it, on a shelf of awards, a framed photo from a charity gala. A younger Evelyn Thorne, accepting an award for innovative leadership. Standing just behind her in the crowd was a face he knew from business journals, David Sterling, her former business partner, and according to years of tabloid speculation, her former fiancé. Their very public, very bitter split had nearly tanked Thorne Ventures 3 years ago. He'd built his rival firm, Sterling Solutions, by poaching her key clients. Leo pushed the observation aside and got to work. The furnace was in a sub-basement mechanical room, a labyrinth of expensive, poorly integrated equipment. He diagnosed the problem in under 10 minutes, a cascade failure. The primary heat exchanger had cracked, a common flaw in that ultra-high-efficiency model when its air intake filters weren't changed religiously. The backup system had then overloaded and tripped all the breakers. It was, in his professional opinion, a case of beautiful design overlooking basic maintenance. As he worked, resetting circuits, bypassing the failed unit to get the secondary system online, he could feel her watching from the doorway. "How long?" she asked, her voice echoing in the concrete room. "I've got temporary heat coming up in 5, he said, not turning around. "But the main unit is finished. It'll need a full replacement. You won't get that done for days in this weather." A silence stretched, filled only by the hum of his tools and the distant moan of the wind. Then she spoke again, and the tone had shifted. It was no longer just a client's question. It was the voice of someone connecting dots. "Cruz, your name is Leo Cruz." He finally turned, a heavy wrench in his hand. The fluorescent light gleamed off the scar on his knuckle from an old pipe threader. He met her gaze and saw the moment it all crashed together in her memory. Her eyes widened, traveling from his face to his company logo on his jacket, then back. The color drained from her cheeks, not from the cold this time. Her hand went to her mouth. The billionaire who had everything, who had judged him insufficient, was utterly speechless, standing in the freezing dark, completely dependent on the man she'd turned away. And Leo, holding the only source of her salvation in his hands, simply said the words he'd rehearsed in his head 1,000 times, his voice calm, final, and absolutely steady. "The temporary heat will hold for 8 hours, Ms. Thorne. After that, this house becomes uninhabitable. Now, do you want to talk about my executive presence, or do you want me to save your home?" The silence that followed was louder than the storm. Evelyn Thorne stared at him, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. For a woman who commanded boardrooms, she had no script for this. The raw physical need for warmth warred with a lifetime of conditioned authority. Leah watched the calculation happen in her eyes, pride versus survival. Survival won. She took a sharp breath, the fog of it visible in the freezing air. "Just fix it," she said, the words barely a whisper. Then clearer, "Please." He gave a single nod, the professional mask back in an instant, but something had shifted in the room's gravity. He was no longer just the help she'd summoned. He was Leo Cruz, the man she deemed unpolished, now holding her comfort, her safety in his capable, calloused hands. He turned back to the control panel, his movements efficient and sure. Within minutes, a deep, promising rumble vibrated through the floor. Warm air, faint at first, then growing stronger, began to whisper from the vents, the sound of life returning to a dead house. He spent the next hour securing the temporary system, explaining in technical, unvarnished terms what he was doing. She listened, arms wrapped around herself, not as a CEO, but as a student. He showed her the cracked heat exchanger, a hairline fracture that had spelled disaster. "This model," he said, tapping the sleek, failed unit. "It's all about efficiency numbers on a brochure, but the alloy they use here is brittle. If the airflow gets restricted by dirty filters and yours are clogged, it overheats and cracks. Basic maintenance would have caught it." The subtext hung between them. Her beautiful, cutting-edge home was vulnerable to the most mundane oversight. Once the immediate crisis was stabilized, she led him to the kitchen, a vast space of cold Italian marble. "Can I get you some coffee?" she asked, the offer awkward, a role reversal she was stumbling through. He accepted. As she fumbled with an expensive espresso machine she clearly never operated herself, he saw the photos on the refrigerator. Not of deals or galas, but of a younger Evelyn with a golden retriever hiking in mountains. A single, faded picture of an older couple, her parents perhaps. The humanity of it disarmed him slightly. They sat at the island, the steam from their mugs rising. The elephant in the room was too large to ignore. Evelyn spoke first, her eyes on her hands. "I remember your interview," she said. "You were passionate about geothermal retrofit solutions for older buildings. It was a good idea." "But not from a guy who looked like he'd just come from a job site," Leo finished, his voice flat. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since the recognition. It was reductive and unfair. The culture at Thorn Ventures then, it was toxic. My former partner, David Sterling, he championed that polished pedigree nonsense. I convinced myself it was necessary to attract certain investors. She paused, a flicker of old anger in her eyes. "I was wrong, and not just about you. That culture cost me my best engineers. It nearly cost me my company." Leo absorbed this. The villain in his story had just been split in two. The rejection wasn't just her capricious judgment, it was a symptom of a failing system she'd partly allowed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you're here," she said simply, "and David isn't, and the people he said were the right fit are probably in warm homes they can afford because I paid them so well." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The furnace that failed is from a subsidiary Sterling Solutions acquired 2 years ago, part of his integrated smart home line." A new, colder chill went through Leo. This wasn't just neglect. This was potentially sabotage from a bitter rival using a product she'd installed in her own home. The stakes had just escalated from personal history to corporate warfare. Before he could respond, a frantic beeping came from a tablet on the counter. Evelyn grabbed it, her face tightening. "The temperature in the East Wing gallery is dropping again. The system's faulting." They hurried back to the mechanical room. Leo's diagnostics now had a new focus. He traced the wiring, the system integrations, and he found it. A secondary control module, a Sterling Solutions brand, had been improperly installed. Its faulty communication with the main furnace was what caused the cascade failure. It wasn't just a broken part. It was a bad marriage of systems, a conflict engineered into the very bones of her house. "This needs to be ripped out," Leo stated, "and the whole control system redesigned. Your smart home is working against itself." He quoted her a number for the emergency overhaul, a figure that would cover Chloe's next 2 years of private school. Evelyn didn't blink. "Do it," she said. Then she added, "And I want you to audit the entire property. The guest house, the pool heating, everything. If David had a hand in it, I need to know." It was an immense job, a career-defining contract, and it came with strings, working daily in the home of the woman who represented his oldest professional wound. He thought of Chloe's face, of the security this could bring them. He accepted. The next week was a strange détente. Leo and his small team became a constant presence on the estate. He saw Evelyn in a new light, not just as the billionaire, but as a woman living in a beautiful, isolating cage. She worked long hours, her video calls filled with tense conversations about board challenges and shareholder pressure. Sterling was making a move, trying to poach a major client. One afternoon, Leo was calibrating sensors in her home office. On her desk, amid the financial reports, was a schematic for a proposed community heating project for the low-income Willow Creek Flats, a project her board was blocking due to insufficient return profile. He recognized the engineering. It was good, empathetic work. "This is yours?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "A passion project. The board calls it a distraction. David called it charity, not business." There was a defiance in her voice, but also a deep fatigue. "It's good business," Leo said quietly. "Preventative. Those old units fail constantly in winter. Kids get sick. Hospitals are expensive. Keeping people warm is cheaper than getting them warm again." He spoke from experience, from countless emergency calls to those very flats. She studied him, a new kind of recognition dawning. "You see the root cause," she said, "not just the broken machine, but the broken system that led to it." A fragile professional respect began to form, built on a shared language of solving real problems. He explained the practical realities of his work, the shortage of skilled technicians, the way the industry prioritized sales over service. She, in turn, explained the financial pressures that forced short-term thinking, even in her position. They were two experts from opposite ends of the same broken ecosystem. Then late one evening, as Leo was finishing up, Evelyn found him in the foyer. She held a thick envelope. "Your final invoice," she said, "and a supplemental." He opened it. The check was for the agreed amount. Paperclipped to it was a second check, even larger, and a handwritten note on her personal stationery. "For the interview I failed to conduct properly, and for the discretion regarding my current vulnerabilities. E.T." It was a payout, a generous one, but a payout nonetheless. A way to settle the account and re-establish the boundary between client and contractor. The respect he'd felt curdled into something colder. She was still trying to manage him, to polish the awkwardness away with money. He handed the second check back, his voice calm but firm. "The invoice covers the work. This," he said, holding the note, "isn't a line item." He saw the surprise, then the shame, flash across her face. She had misstepped again, trying to solve a human complication with a financial transaction. She took the check back, silent. The following day, the tension was palpable. The work continued, but the easy exchange of ideas was gone. Leo was preparing to leave when Evelyn's personal assistant, a harried young man named Ben, rushed in, pale. "Ms. Thorne, it's the Hamilton deal. They've just signed with Sterling Solutions. The press release is going out in an hour." Evelyn went very still. The Hamilton account was the cornerstone of her comeback strategy. Losing it was catastrophic. Ben continued, his voice dropping. "And there's a rumor. Sterling is telling people the loss is because of instability in your personal life. He's hinting about the blizzard, about you being unreachable, your home systems failing." It was a targeted attack. David Sterling wasn't just competing, he was weaponizing her private crisis, using the furnace failure as proof of her personal and professional neglect. Her fortress of glass was now a spotlight. She turned to Leo, her earlier composure shattered, replaced by a desperate strategic fury. "He knows about the furnace, he caused it, and now he's using it to destroy me." Her eyes locked onto his. "I need more than a repairman, Leo. I need a witness. I need someone who can look my board in the eye and tell them exactly what happened in my basement that night. Someone they can't dismiss as a corporate lackey." The request hung in the air. It was an invitation into the heart of her war, far beyond pipes and wiring. It meant taking a side, attaching his hard-won reputation to her volatile battle. The safe choice was to cash his check and walk away. But the man who built Prime Climate on answering the calls no one else would take saw not a billionaire, but a client in a different kind of emergency, one where the thing failing wasn't a furnace, but her entire legacy. He thought of David Sterling, a man who would sabotage a home's heat for a stock advantage. He thought of the community heating project gathering dust on her desk. The choice became clear and terrifying. "Tell me when and where," Leo said. The drive back to his apartment that night was spent in deep silence, the weight of the promise settling on him. He walked into the quiet living room where Chloe was asleep on the couch, a textbook open on her chest. He smoothed her hair, her innocent face a stark contrast to the high-stakes conflict he'd just joined. His phone buzzed, a single text from an unknown number. It was a photo, taken from a distance, of him leaving the Thorne estate that evening. Underneath it, a message: "Smart contractors stick to plumbing, a friend." The threat was implicit. David Sterling knew who he was. The battle lines were now drawn directly to his doorstep. Leo looked from the threatening text to his sleeping daughter, understanding with a cold, final certainty that fixing the billionaire's heater had just unlocked a door he could never close. Leo stared at the text until the screen went dark. The anonymous threat was a grenade rolled into his quiet life. His first call wasn't to Evelyn, it was to his sister, asking if Chloe could stay a few more days. His second was to a former client who worked in private security, getting advice on basic digital hygiene and physical awareness. The world of corporate espionage had just landed on his doorstep, and it smelled like cheap cologne and ruthless ambition. He met Evelyn the next morning in a neutral location, a quiet back booth of a diner she'd never frequent. He showed her the text. Her face hardened, but she wasn't surprised. "David's style," she said, pushing her coffee away. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He hires people who hire other people. It's meant to scare you off. She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the father beneath the contractor. Is your daughter safe? She will be, Leo said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. The protective fury in his tone seemed to reassure her. They were no longer just client and contractor. They were co-conspirators in a bunker, sharing the same fear. Evelyn laid out the battlefield. The emergency board meeting was in 48 hours. Sterling's narrative was gaining traction, that Evelyn was distracted, that her personal life was in disarray, that her judgment was compromised, as evidenced by the catastrophic failure of her own home systems. Her opponents on the board were circling. Leo's role was simple and devastating, to be the expert witness. To explain, in clear, technical terms, that the failure wasn't random neglect, but the predictable result of a specific, faulty component from a Sterling Solutions acquisition, improperly integrated, to turn David's weapon against him. Leo spent the next day preparing. He compiled photos of the cracked heat exchanger, the model numbers, the incompatible control module. He drafted a timeline linking the installation of the Sterling component to the system's instability. He was building a forensic case, not with financial documents, but with torque specs and wiring diagrams. It was a language he was fluent in. But David Sterling wasn't idle. The next morning, a local business blog published a hit piece. The headline, "Crisis Contractor, Is Prime Climate's Sudden Rise Too Good to Be True?" It cited anonymous sources questioning Leo's licensing, hinting at substandard work, and most painfully, it dredged up his personal past. It mentioned Maria leaving, framing it as abandonment due to financial instability, and subtly questioned his ability to manage a business, let alone a complex estate like Thorn. The article was a masterclass in poison, blending just enough truth with devastating insinuation. Leo's phone exploded, not with threats this time, but with concerned calls from longtime clients. His two apprentices looked nervous. His hard-won reputation, built over thousands of faithful service calls, was being smeared with a few keystrokes. This was Sterling's real play, discredit the witness before he could speak. Evelyn was furious. She called from her car. "He's trying to isolate you, to make you look like a desperate guy I scraped up to tell a convenient story. We need to counter this now." How? Leo asked, feeling the ground shift under him. He could fix a furnace, but how did you fix a lie that was already spreading online? "We don't deny it," Evelyn said, her voice sharp with strategy. "We reframe it. We go public first, together." That afternoon, Evelyn Thorne did something she had never done in her career. She posted a personal video on her professional LinkedIn account. Sitting in her home office, with the repaired furnace humming quietly in the background, she spoke directly to the camera. She didn't mention Sterling by name. She talked about the blizzard. She admitted to a failure of oversight in her own home. And then she introduced Leo Cruz. "This is the expert who saved my home from freezing," she said, the video cutting to a shot of Leo in his work jacket, pointing calmly at a schematic. He's also the founder of Prime Climate, a local business built on integrity and expertise. Recently, some are trying to attack his character, perhaps because he has the expertise to explain a technical truth others find inconvenient. I've asked him to present that truth to my board. I believe in transparency. And I believe in giving credit where it's due. The video went viral. It was raw, it was real, and it completely bypassed the toxic blog post. Comments flooded in from locals defending Leo, from other small business owners, from women in tech praising Evelyn's vulnerability. The narrative was flipped. Leo wasn't a dubious contractor. He was the honest craftsman being bullied by faceless corporate forces. Evelyn wasn't a distracted CEO. She was a leader standing up for a small business. Sterling smear campaign had accidentally made them both underdogs. The board meeting was held in a sterile high-floor conference room with a view of the frozen city. Leo walked in wearing a new simple button-down shirt, his tool bag replaced by a tablet. The board members, a collection of sharp suits and skeptical eyes, watched him as if he were a strange artifact. David Sterling was there, smiling, relaxed, the picture of polished confidence. He gave Leo a faint, dismissive nod. Evelyn presented first, laying out the financial fallout of the Hamilton deal loss. Then she introduced Leo. "This is Leo Cruz of Prime Climate. He restored function to my home. He will explain why it failed." Leo stood. He didn't use corporate jargon. He used the language of cause and effect. He displayed his photos on the large screen. "This is a VX9000 heat exchanger," he began, his voice steady. "Manufactured by Thermocore, a company acquired by Sterling Solutions 2 years ago. It's a good unit, but it has a known sensitivity to airflow restriction." He showed the clogged filters from Evelyn's estate. "The secondary system that failed is a Sterling Smart Connect module. Its communication protocol is incompatible with the main furnace's older board. It's a known compatibility issue documented in trade forums, but not in the official installation guide you all received." He zoomed in on the faulty wiring. "This isn't neglect. This is a design conflict. It was guaranteed to fail. The only question was when." He was compelling. His expertise was undeniable, his manner utterly unpretentious. He was the antithesis of the slick salesmen who usually hawked these systems. The board listened, some taking notes. Then it was Sterling's turn. He stood, smoothing his tie. "A compelling story from a hands-on professional," he said, the slight pause before professional doing its work. "But it's just that, a story. This looks like routine maintenance failure, tragically common. My heart goes out to Evelyn for the inconvenience, but to suggest some corporate conspiracy over a dirty filter is quite a leap." He then turned his gaze on Leo, his smile turning icy. "Mr. Cruz, your dedication is admirable, but let's talk about your own stability. Your business, Prime Climate, is it true you've faced multiple complaints about invoicing irregularities?" It was a bluff, a shot in the dark, but it landed in the silent room. Leo felt every eye on him. He saw Evelyn tense. Sterling was throwing mud, hoping something would stick. Leo didn't flinch. He looked directly at Sterling, his gaze as steady as when he diagnosed the furnace. "My invoices are itemized, down to the quarter hour of labor and the manufacturer's cost of every O-ring," he said, his voice low and clear. "I can provide them for the last 7 years. Can you provide the compatibility report for the Smart Connect module and the VX9000? The one your engineers must have written before you sold it as an integrated solution." The room held its breath. Sterling's smile didn't waver, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. He had no such report. Everyone knew it. Leo had just called his bluff with a technical specificity that couldn't be faked. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room inverted again. The contractor in the simple shirt had just outmaneuvered the billionaire in the bespoke suit on a point of factual integrity. The meeting ended without a resolution, but the damage to Sterling's credibility was done. As they left, Evelyn touched Leo's arm, a quick, grateful press. "You were perfect," she whispered. But victory was short-lived. The following day, Leo received a formal letter. It was from the State Contractor Licensing Board. A complaint had been filed, alleging he had performed work outside the scope of his license by redesigning a core control system at the Thorne estate. The complaint was frivolous, but the investigation would be slow, public, and costly. It would freeze his ability to pull permits for new jobs. It was Sterling's bureaucratic kill shot, aimed straight at his livelihood. Worse, a second letter arrived for Evelyn from her own board. It cited concerns about ongoing personal entanglements with litigation-prone vendors and called for an independent review of all contracts awarded to Prime Climate, implying favoritism. Sterling had successfully tied her fate to his, creating a paralyzing knot. That night, sitting in his dim apartment, Leo felt the walls closing in. He could fight the technical battle. He couldn't fight this slow, procedural strangulation. He called Evelyn. "They're going to stall us to death," he said, the fatigue thick in his voice. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The CEO was gone. In her place was something harder, quieter, and more determined. "You're right," she said. "We've been playing defense on their board, in their committees. We've been trying to prove we're not wrong." She paused, and he could almost hear the tectonic shift in her thinking. "Forget the board, forget the license complaint. David wants a war of attrition, fine, but we're not fighting for my seat anymore, Leo." "Then what are we fighting for?" he asked. He heard the faint tap of her fingers on a keyboard. "We are fighting for the thing he can't buy, can't smear, and doesn't understand," she said. "We're going to build the proof, not on paper, in the ground. You showed me a broken system in my basement. Now I want you to show the whole city how to fix one." "The thing we're going to build," Evelyn said, her voice crackling with focus through the phone, "is the Willow Creek Flats retrofit, my passion project, the one the board blocked. We are doing it, not as a Thorn Ventures initiative, as a private pilot, you and me." Leo was silent, processing the scale of the pivot. They were abandoning the defensive fight in the boardroom to launch an offensive on the ground. The flats were 40 units of agging, inefficient electric heating, a financial and thermal disaster for the low-income families living there. A full geothermal retrofit was a massive undertaking. "How?" was all he could ask. "I'll fund it personally," she said. "You'll lead the technical side. We'll document every step. The sourcing, the labor, the before and after utility costs. We make the entire process transparent. We show what real infrastructure looks like when it's done right, by people who care about the outcome, not just the margin." It was a masterstroke. It was proof of concept that couldn't be argued with. It would also be a colossal amount of work. Leo felt the weight, but also the rightness of it. This was why he'd gotten into engineering in the first place. And the licensing complaint, the board review. "Let them investigate," Evelyn said, a new steel in her voice. "By the time their reports are filed, we'll have a working model that saves real people real money. Facts on the ground beat allegations in a file every time." They moved with furious speed. Evelyn used personal capital to create a new LLC, the Crestline Foundation, distancing the project from her embattled company. Leo assembled a dream team, his 2 loyal apprentices, a geothermal specialist he'd worked with for years, and a crew of union plumbers and electricians who were tired of doing patchwork fixes on failing systems. Ground broke in early spring, the thawing earth a symbol of their fresh start. Leo was on site every day, his hands dirty, solving problems in real time. Evelyn was there too, not in a hard hat for photo ops, but in work boots, reviewing schematics, learning about ground loops and heat pumps, asking questions that showed she'd done her homework. The local press, initially skeptical of the Billionaire's pet project, began to notice the sheer competence on display. Here was a high-profile tech CEO and a local contractor, working side by side, speaking a shared language of practical solutions. David Sterling's attacks continued, but they began to ring hollow against the tangible progress at the flats. His whispers about instability seemed absurd when contrasted with daily videos of efficient, on-budget work. His complaint to the licensing board stalled in procedural review. The independent audit of Evelyn's contracts found nothing but scrupulous market-rate payments to Prime Climate. Then, in a desperate move, Sterling tried to sabotage their supply chain. He used his influence to pressure a distributor to delay shipment of the specialized geothermal tubing. Leo got the call on a Thursday. The entire project would be set back by weeks. He told Evelyn, expecting fury. Instead, she smiled. "I've been waiting for this," she said. She made one call. The next morning, a convoy of trucks from a distributor in the next state, a company owned by a friend she'd mentored years ago, rolled onto the site with the exact materials at cost. Sterling's attempt to choke them had only demonstrated the strength of Evelyn's real network, built on loyalty, not transactions. The project was completed in a record 4 months. The day they switched on the new system was a community event. Families from the flats gathered, local officials came, and even a few members of Evelyn's board attended, their curiosity overwhelming their caution. Leaf stood beside a control panel, Evelyn beside him. With a nod from an elderly resident, Mrs. Gable, who'd lived there for 30 years, he threw the switch. A deep, quiet hum emanated from the new ground source units. There was no dramatic roar, just the sound of reliable, sustainable heat beginning its work. The data did the rest. The first month's utility bills for the flats dropped by an average of 62%. The story was picked up by national sustainable business journals. The narrative was irresistible, the billionaire and the blue-collar technician, united by a rejected past, building a model for the future. David Sterling's smear campaign now looked exactly like what it was, petty, personal, and profoundly out of touch. The pressure on Thorn Ventures' board became unsustainable. Major investors, seeing the positive press and the proven results of the Crestline pilot, began demanding stability and a return to ethical leadership. At an emergency shareholder meeting, Emotion was put forward not about Evelyn's performance, but about David Sterling's conduct as a major shareholder and his attempts to damage company value through personal vendettas. He was voted off the board. Evelyn regained full control. Her first official act as re-empowered CEO was to adopt the Crestline Foundation's retrofit model as the new standard for all Thorn Ventures' sustainable infrastructure projects. Her second was to issue a formal, public apology to Leo Cruz, not just for the interview 5 years prior, but for the industry-wide bias that values polish over substance. She announced a new apprenticeship fund, named for Prime Climate, to train the next generation of hands-on engineers. For Leo, the vindication was sweet, but the change was deeper. The licensing complaint was dismissed. Business inquiries flooded in, not just for repairs, but for large-scale consulting. He hired more staff, expanded his shop, but the most profound shift was internal. The ghost of that rejection had finally been laid to rest, not by a paycheck, but by being seen, utterly and completely, for the value he'd always possessed. One evening in late autumn, with the Flats project wrapped and the first chill back in the air, Evelyn came to his workshop. Chloe was inside, doing homework at his desk. Evelyn held a small box. "This isn't a check," she said, preempting him. Inside was a simple, elegant key fob and a set of blueprints. "It's an offer. The new headquarters for Thorn Ventures Infrastructure Division. We're building it from the ground up. I want you to design the mechanical heart of it, not as a contractor. As a partner, a founding member of the division." It was the job he'd interviewed for 5 years ago, but reimagined, rebuilt with his fingerprints on its very foundations. He looked at Chloe, who gave him a thumbs up, then back at Evelyn. He saw no pity, no guilt, only fierce respect and a shared vision. "Tell me about the specs," he said. The partnership was announced to great fanfare, but the real story was quieter. It was in the weekly design meetings where Leo's practical veto saved them from a beautiful but flawed ventilation concept. It was in Evelyn defending his technical recommendations to skeptical investors with a conviction that came from having seen him work. It was a mutual trust, hard-forged in the heat of crisis. On the 1-year anniversary of the blizzard, a storm warning was issued for Willow Creek. This time, Evelyn's estate was ready, its systems overhauled and resilient. Leo was at his own home with Chloe, the fire going. His phone buzzed. It was Evelyn, not a crisis call, an invitation. "The storm's coming, I have soup. And I'd rather not watch it alone in this big glass box. Would you and Chloe like to ride it out over here? There's a generator that actually works this time." They went. The three of them sat in the now familiar kitchen, watching the snow whip against the windows. Chloe told Evelyn about her science project. Evelyn listened with genuine interest. The billionaire, the contractor, and his daughter, sharing soup in the warm, secure heart of a house that had once been a frozen monument to failure. When the power flickered out across the ridge, the estate's backup system engaged seamlessly. The lights stayed on. The heat held steady. Leo caught Evelyn's eye across the table. A silent, profound understanding passed between them. They had fixed more than a furnace. They had built something that could weather any storm. The final surprise came 6 months later from an unexpected source. David Sterling, his reputation in tatters, his company struggling, reached out not with a threat, but with a request. He asked Leo, through a mutual acquaintance, to consult on a failing HVAC system in a children's hospital wing his firm had built. The message said Sterling had finally realized that some problems required a mechanic, not a manager. Leo took the job. He fixed the system. He sent an invoice at his standard rate. No more, no less. It was the ultimate closure, not revenge, but professional grace. The man who had tried to break him was now, quietly, his client. The story that began with a rejection and a breakdown in a blizzard ended not with a dramatic victory, but with a lasting repair. Leo Cruz and Evelyn Thorn didn't just bridge the gap between their worlds. They built a new one in the space between, where hands-on knowledge and strategic vision could work in concert, where the past could be acknowledged without defining the future. The heat, once lost, was now something they knew how to keep. So what do we make of a story that begins with a broken heater? On one level, it's a tale of personal vindication, the quiet triumph of skill over status, of substance over polish. But look deeper, and you see a blueprint for something more fragile and more essential in our modern world: trust. In an economy that often rewards perception over function, The crisis in that mansion forced a moment of absolute, non-negotiable truth. When the temperature plunges, the only currency that matters is the ability to generate warmth. Everything else is just conversation. Leo Cruz and Evelyn Thorne discovered that the most resilient systems aren't built on flawless components, but on redundant connections, on having more than one way to get the heat flowing. Their partnership became that redundancy. His hands-on genius provided the practical fix. Her strategic vision scaled the solution. One without the other would have failed. Together, they built something that outlasted the storm, the scandal, and the skepticism. The lingering question is whether a single dad can fix a billionaire's heater. It's how many other Leos are out there, overlooked in interviews because their brilliance doesn't fit a prepackaged idea of what brilliance should look like. And how many other Evelyns are trapped in gilded cages of their own making, one failed system away from realizing that the people they've been taught to dismiss are the very ones who hold the tools to their liberation. Their story is a reminder that every hierarchy, no matter how polished, is just one crisis away from an inversion, and that the most profound repairs often start not with a grand design, but with a simple human decision: to stop in the storm, to open the door, and to recognize the value in the person standing on your threshold, toolbox in hand. If you found meaning in this story of unexpected allies and second chances, consider subscribing. We explore the hidden architectures of other remarkable turnarounds every week. Thanks for listening.